Hi everybody, welcome to today's story time. We are on the fourth book in the Universal series, A Feather of Faith. Chapter 1, Crossroads. As Molly slowly lowered the letter to the table, the room filled with a deathly silence. The news of Molly's mum and dad returning back to the stars began to sink in. Hugh's gaze fixed on Molly. He didn't know what to say to make things better, perhaps for the first time. The silence was broken by the screech of Ben's chair as he slid it back along the floor and rose to his feet. He walked across the kitchen, flicked the switch on the kettle and moved towards Molly. "May I?" he questioned gently, motioning towards the letter. Molly smiled meekly and nodded. Ben sunk his left hand deep into his pocket of his jeans as he read through the letter. Molly slowly looked up and tilted her head back. "What's going to happen to me, Ben?" she asked. She realised in that moment that everything she thought she knew was now unknown. Her future was now unwritten. Ben placed the letter back in front of Molly and turned to the now boiling kettle. He didn't say a word. Ben reached for a mug and put some coffee in. He poured the boiling water on top and watched it swirl around. He turned to Molly and Hugh. "Please go and check the horses in the barn have enough hay and water for the night." Hugh and Molly looked at each other in disbelief, but slowly got to their feet. They walked to the front door, slipped on their boots and coats, and stepped out onto the front porch in silence. They all listened and waited for the click of the front door closing. Billy slid out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down at the table, clasping his hands together and placing them in front of him. Ben moved and sat opposite him. Ali flopped her head into her hands and ran her fingers through her hair. She shook her head sadly. "This can't be happening. This stuff doesn't happen in real life." Billy reached across and gently took her hand. "We have to figure out a plan for Molly," he said carefully. "She'll want answers when she steps back through that door." "Plan? What plan?" asked Ali in frustration. "They were just here, having a cup of tea at this table. How can they be gone?" she exclaimed. Billy looked across at Ben. Ben took a sip of coffee, playing for time. He leant back in his chair as he watched tears trickle down Ali's cheek. "You'll have to go back to England with Molly to make arrangements." "Does she have any other family?" Ben asked. Ali's expression began to soften as she looked across at Ben. The realisation of the journey Molly was about to take became very real. She gently shook her head. "The only family Molly had was Nana, Billy piped up. "So she will have to come and live with us, you two." Ali cautiously looked across at Ben. "I bet this isn't quite what you bargained for when you first asked me and Hugh back to the ranch at the country fair and rodeo?" she asked. Ben reached across the table and took Ali's hand. "Sometimes the greatest love doesn't have the easiest start. There are tests which help a relationship to grow strong roots like an old oak tree, so that over time, when the tree has grown tall, it can withstand both the sunny and stormy days with ease." Ali squeezed Ben's hand. "Well, we sure are having our fair share of tests," she said. She let go of Ben's hand and got up from the table. "I'd best go and make that plan then," she added with an obnoxious glare at Billy, before heading across into Ben's office. She closed the door loudly behind her, muttering to herself as she went. She was still getting used to Billy and his ways. Just then the front door opened and Molly and Hugh peered around the edge. "Is it all right for us to come in?" Molly asked cautiously. "Yes, of course," Billy answered enthusiastically. He waved his hand and motioned for them to come and sit at the table. Hugh and Molly took off their coats and boots and made their way across to the table. Molly went and sat back down next to Billy. Billy put his arm around her protectively. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Molly mustered all her strength, forced a smile and nodded. Billy held her gaze. As he looked deep into her eyes, he could see the pain whirling around inside like a raging stormy sea. Billy wrapped her in a hug and squeezed her tightly. "We'll get through this," he urged. "Together, as a family," he whispered. Molly untangled herself from his arms. "I'm going to head upstairs for a little while," she uttered, and slid off her chair. She shuffled her feet across the living room floor and used the banister to pull her body up the stairs. She felt herself grow heavier with each step. Hugh watched Molly and felt an urgent yearning to fix everything. "Maybe we could all sit down later and have a movie night," he suggested hopefully, still staring after Molly. "That's a great idea," confirmed Ben, But don't forget, Molly needs to process the news, so maybe give her a little time by herself, he added. Yeah, she can have all the time whilst I get everything ready. That's long enough, Hugh said, feeling his energy return. He bounced off his chair and ran upstairs to get his duvet. Billy leant forward and rested his elbows on the table. He looked across at Ben. So, he asked, his tone hardening, are you still happy with your decision? You're not just getting Ali, but Hugh too, and now perhaps Molly as well. Can the ranch support them all? Billy asked with concern. Ben shuffled uncomfortably in his seat. Well, I have saved up my winnings. That should tie us over for a little whilst I make some changes, he offered. But one thing is for sure, I will make it work, he added with determination. Billy settled back in his chair, sunk his hands into the pockets of his jeans and nodded. His eyes began to change as his thoughts gathered momentum. Well, I best be heading off, he said, as he suddenly hit with the realisation of what he needed to do. Billy reached across and picked up Molly's letter from Nannerl. I'll take this up to Molly. I think she'll need it all the hope she can get, he said. He turned and made his way across the living room to where Hugh was now busy building a fire. Hugh sensed Billy behind him as he placed the kindling carefully in the fire. Aren't you staying for movie night? He asked without turning around. Not tonight, replied Billy, but I'll be back tomorrow. But this is a family movie night and we're family, Hugh protested. He turned and placed his hands on his hips. Billy abruptly stopped and looked down at Hugh. Well, he muttered uncomfortably. It had been a long while since he had done something as a family. Hugh got up as Ben entered the room. I'm not asking, Grandpa Billy. You're staying for movie night. We need everyone to pull together to get through this, Hugh asserted. Ben looked at Billy. I think you've met your match, Billy. Best do what the chief says. He can be pretty persistent when he gets an idea in his head, Ben said with a smile, gesturing towards Hugh. Billy stood in shock. The silence seemed to stretch into forever, but he finally surrendered and nodded in agreement before turning and heading to the stairs. Billy made his way upstairs. His feet landed heavily on each step. He slowly pushed open Molly's door and found her curled up on her bed. Molly quickly squeezed her eyes shut as Billy silently moved across and laid the letter by her side. Even the darkness couldn't hide the tear stains on Molly's cheeks. Billy left the room as silently as he had entered it. As Billy made his way back downstairs, he could see that Hugh was already sitting on the couch with a bowl of popcorn. The fire was blazing enthusiastically in the background. Hugh turned around to look at Billy. Come on, Grandpa, he invited, patting the space next to him. Billy gingerly made his way across and sat down in a large chair next to the couch. This'll do just fine for me, he said, as he lowered his tired body into the seat. Ben was leaning against the office door in deep conversation with Ali. Hugh and Billy could hear her ferociously tapping away on the computer keys. I'll drop you off in the morning, Ben offered, before turning around and joining Hugh and Billy. Come on, Mum, Hugh called with increasing restlessness. Ben came and sat down next to Hugh, pulling the duvet up over him. He placed his finger to his lips. It looks like it's going to be a lads' movie night, observed Ben as he pressed play on the DVD player. Hugh was just about to object, but Ben quickly intervened. He put his finger to his lips again, but more urgently this time, and pointed at the television. Keep quiet, Hugh. In the background they could hear the printer working hard as more and more paper was ejected. Ali scooped up the wad of paper and briskly made her way out of the office and towards the stairs. She glanced at the three of them, now engrossed in the movie. Ali made her way up the stairs. As she reached the top, she could hear sniffling sounds come from Molly's room, so she slowly pushed open the door. The landing light cast a soft glow over the objects in there. It illuminated the shape of Molly, curled up tight in a tight ball on her bed, shaking. Ali placed the paper on the end of the bed and quickly made her way over to her. She scooped Molly up in her arms and gently rocked her from side to side. I've got you, Ali soothed. I will always be here, she whispered over and over again into Molly's ears. Molly's tears finally began to slow. She lifted her head and looked deep into Ali's eyes. I have just found a place called home, and now I'm going to lose it, she sobbed. Ali, please don't make me go back. I want to stay here with you. I promise I won't be any trouble. I'll help out around the ranch. Please, Ali, don't make me go back, she pleaded, as fresh tears began to tumble down her cheeks. Ali squeezed Molly tightly, trying to fight back her own tears. As they stood at the seemingly impossible crossroads, she did not know the answer. After a long pause, Ali loosened her grip and looked back at Molly. I don't know what the future holds, Molly, but she declared honestly, but tomorrow we need to fly back together and start to make some choices. With each decision we make and with each action we take, more of the path we need to go down will be revealed. But for now, we just need to take the first step. We will slowly be able to see what is ahead, Ali said lovingly. We will be leaving in the morning, so you need to pack your suitcase tonight. Ali began to move away and reached for the papers. Molly quickly grabbed hold of Ali's arm. Please, Ali, if I leave, I may never be able to come back. Please, Ali, I want to stay at home. This is my home, Molly said urgently, as she rose to her knees. Ali felt her heart tear apart as she looked at Molly in despair. She couldn't watch the pain anymore. She quickly made her way to the door, holding the pile of papers tightly to her beating chest. I'll bring your suitcase downstairs later, Ali said quickly before making her way towards her own bedroom. Molly's head sunk lower and lower as the pain crumpled every cell of her body into desperation. Please let me stay at home, she whispered, trying desperately to soothe herself. She became tormented by the stark realization that never again would she be able to tell her mum and dad that she loved them. Never again would she be able to be wrapped in the protection of their arms. Never again would she receive a kiss goodnight from them. Molly's body began to tremble uncontrollably. The life that was in her was shaken to its very core. She reached for the letter from Nana O that was still lying on the bottom of her bed, where Billy had left it. She lowered herself back onto the pillow and curled up into a tight ball. She gently rocked and tried to gasp for air as her body began to shut down. Ali walked slowly down the landing towards her room. She switched on the light and rested her head against the wall. How am I going to get through this? She trudged her way to the wardrobe, opened it up and pulled out her suitcase. She dropped it heavily onto the bed. Ali's eyes glazed over as the reality of it all engulfed her. Never in a million years did she think she would be going back to England for these reasons. Sometimes things have to fall apart before they can be put back together again in a new way, a voice said. Ali looked up to see Ben standing in the doorway. He glided across the room, wrapped her in a hug and kissed her on the cheek. Ali's arms automatically gripped onto Ben's body. This doesn't feel like my world is falling apart, she answered sadly. This feels like my whole world is crashing apart. She let out a deep sigh and Ben squeezed her tighter. But she slowly began to feel that familiar feeling that seemed to take hold whenever she was in Ben's arm. The love was reawoken inside of her and the room grew just a little bit brighter. It feels like life is repeating itself again, Ali muffled into Ben's chest. I thought all that stuff with Hugh's dad dying was done, but this is all seems to be waking up a sleeping dragon inside of me. Ben began to smile as he peeled Ali from his body. It will always be part of your story, Ali, he replied, but it doesn't need to dictate your future choices, he added, as he guided her to sit on the bed. He knelt on one knee in front of her. This time you don't have to go through this alone, he said lovingly, as he gently played with Ali's engagement ring between his fingers. Ali glanced down and couldn't stop a smile creeping out as she looked deep into Ben's eyes. She slowly recognised a sparkle, a light deep inside that shone so bright. It takes great faith to love, said Ben. Because where there is love, there will always be loss, he added. His forehead wrinkled with concentration. The alternative is to never love at all, but then there would be no opportunity to experience one of the greatest achievements of mankind. Ali placed a hand on each of Ben's shoulders. You know, sometimes I do wonder where these wise words come from, she said, bewildered, but slightly bemused. Ben lifted his hand and pointed to Ali's heart. Listen to the whispers of wisdom from deep within, for that is where the answer to life are and the steps that need to be taken. Ali excitedly flung her arms around Ben's neck, causing him to lose his balance. They both started to chuckle. Even in the darkest hour, you bring light, laughter and love, Ali said with heartfelt admiration. That's because all of those things are the cement that is holding our new life together. Now, come on, Miss Ali. That suitcase won't pack itself. Ali playfully flopped back onto the bed in protest, but she soon erupted into a belly-roaring laugh as she felt Ben's fingers begin to tickle her. Stop, stop, Ali gasped. Okay, I'll pack, she managed to stutter between giggles. Ali crawled off the bed and walked across to the wardrobe. She pulled out her clothes and passed them to Ben. He folded them and placed them in the suitcase. They were suddenly interrupted by the sound of a door creaking. Ben looked up to see Molly standing there. She looked so lost. He sunk back down onto his knees and opened his arms wide. Molly scurried across to him and snuggled gratefully into his chest. She buried herself into the safety of his arms. How are you getting on with your packing? Ben whispered tentatively. He felt a slight shake of Molly's head in response. Would you like some help? He asked gently. Molly's fingers tightened their grip on Ben's shirt. Ben looked up and watched Alice disappear into the bathroom. She glanced down at him as she passed and gave him a weak smile. Ben casually scooped Molly up into his arms and began to carry her through to her bedroom. Ben glanced over the landing balcony to see Billy and Hugh both fast asleep as the ending credits of the film serenaded them. He continued to walk with Molly into her room, flicking the light switch on as he entered. He placed Molly carefully onto the bed. Now, how about we do this together? He asked as he reached under the bed to pull out Molly's suitcase. Molly sat unmoving like a statue. She watched Ben cautiously as she began to move around with the room, placing her clothes back into the suitcase. I will be able to come back, won't I? Molly muttered under her breath. Ben paused a moment and looked across at Molly. You can always come back whenever you want. There will always be a home for you here, he reassured her with conviction, before taking a jumper and placing it in the suitcase. Molly felt a welcome wave of relief wash over her as she grasped onto the piece of hope. Ben placed the last piece of clothing into the suitcase. He was just about to close the lid when Molly quickly slipped the note from Nana O on top of her clothes. She listened as a zip whizzed around the case. That was it. It was done. She was leaving. Ben lifted the suitcase onto the floor. Come on, you. I think you'd better get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day, Ben said, as he rolled back the duvet. Molly climbed under and moved her pillow to the other end of the bed so she could look out of the window. Ben pulled the duvet up around her and tucked her in. Ben reached across to turn off the light. The room descended into darkness and the sky became illuminated by the stars. He shuffled down and lay next to Molly, and they both stared silently out at the night sky. Molly carefully lifted her hand and pointed at the 3 stars all in a row. There is Mum, Dad, and Nana O, she said quietly. They both gazed at the 3 stars sparkling in the sky. Words were not needed in that moment. Ben eventually heard Molly's breathing deepen and slow. He was thankful to see that exhaustion had finally got the better of her. It was too much. Ben carefully slid off the bed and crept out of the room. He made sure a thin crack of light from the landing could make its way into Molly's room, before slowly making his way downstairs to his office. As he passed Hugh and Billy, he reached over for the TV remote and switched it off. He then walked into the kitchen to make himself a much-needed cup of coffee before escaping into the solitude of his office. He carefully closed the door as so not to wake anyone. He placed his coffee on the desk and flopped heavily into his chair. His head fell into his hands and he surrendered to his tears as they finally escaped. Everything became still as Ben's body shook and the tears streamed down his cheeks. He didn't notice Ali open the door and walk across to perch on the edge of his desk. He suddenly felt her presence and lifted his head out of his hands. He quickly shot back in his chair and self-consciously tried to wipe away any evidence of his tears. Ali shook her head, leant forwards and wrapped her arms reassuringly around him. He realised that he had no choice but to allow her to comfort him, and he felt his body begin to relax again. There is no shame in sharing tears, Ali whispered reassuringly as she gently rocked Ben from side to side. Ben let out a large sigh and brought his head away from Ali's body. I guess, he stuttered. Ali took Ben's hand and began to guide him back out of the office. It's been a long day for all of us, Ali confirmed as she switched off the lights. Where's Hugh? Ben asked as they walked past the now empty sofa and chair. I carried Hugh to bed, answered Ali, and Billy is sleeping in the guest room, she added. She tugged at Ben's hand and they climbed the stairs together, their footsteps the only sound in the house. They reached the bedroom, changed into their pyjamas, and slid gratefully under the duvet. Ali snuggled up to Ben and rested her head on his chest. Ben wrapped his arms around Ali's body. "Quite a day, huh?" said Ben as he stared up at the ceiling. "Just another bend in the river of life," Ali managed to whisper before the welcome relief of sleep took over. Bang! Ben shot bolt upright in the bed as the noise from downstairs echoed through the house. He squinted as his eyes tried to readjust to the morning light. He felt groggy and disorientated. Once he had got his bearings, he whipped back the duvet and briskly made his way down the stairs to investigate the noise. As he approached the kitchen, he saw a frozen Billy holding a frying pan mid-air, Molly covered in flour, and Hugh pointing at a spatula. Ben stopped to take in the scene before him. "Morning," he croaked as he shook his head. He walked across to the kettle to make himself a coffee and Ali a cup of tea. The three of them stood like statues, and whilst they watched Ben move across the kitchen and then disappear back upstairs, Billy crept over to the edge of the kitchen and slowly peered around the corner. When he was happy that Ben had reached the landing and was out of earshot, he spun round. "Right, so here is the plan," he said as he marched over to the cooker and put the frying pan down. Hugh came up behind with the pancake mixture. All three of them watched him pour it into the pan and listened to the sizzling sounds of it cooking. "Tom should be here in the next hour," confirmed Billy. "Molly, when he arrives, could you make him a coffee? Then you two head out and complete morning chores whilst I talked about him." "You know he really isn't going to like this plan," Molly asserted as she began to set the table. Billy slowly turned around and leant against the worktop. "I know, but Ben has had to do this all by himself for far too long. He didn't have anyone he could turn to. He has become a great man because of it. Not many people you meet can lead others with love and inspiration to be their best," he explained. "But things are different now. Ben needs to realise that he has people around him who want to help and are more than ready to put into practice all the skills he has helped to nurture in them." Hugh carefully carried the frying pan over to the plates and tipped the first pancake out. He then returned back to the cooker to begin the next one. They heard footsteps coming back down the stairs. They listened carefully, glanced at each other and smiled. Billy placed his hand in the centre of the room. Molly put her hand on top, and then Hugh added his to the hand pile. "Ready?" asked Billy excitedly. "Ready," Hugh and Molly chuckled in unison. Ben walked across the living room and placed Ali's suitcase by the front door. His heart began to hurt. He never wanted to see this suitcase again, not for a long while at least. He let out an audible sigh as he dragged his feet to the kitchen. He took a huge gulp of air, straightened up, forced a smile, and went to sit at the table. Hugh scurried across and placed a pancake on Ben's plate in front of him. Molly followed swiftly behind and brought fresh coffee. "I'll take over," Billy said as he motioned for Hugh to go and have his breakfast too. Molly glanced up at Billy and he nodded for her to do the same. As they each took their places, they heard Ali's footsteps tread along the landing and then down the stairs. They were tucking into their pancakes as Ali arrived in the kitchen. She pulled up a chair next to Molly. Her eyes were red from the morning's tears. Ben looked at her and another sharp pain shot through her heart. How could he protect her while she was away? Billy swiftly came across and placed a pancake in front of Ali. He laid an encouraging hand gently on her shoulder as he passed. Just then he glanced out the window and saw Tom's truck turn down the driveway. He managed to catch Hugh's attention with a quick raise of his eyebrows, signalling that it was time for them to head outside. Hugh nudged Molly under the table and she scowled back at him, not comprehending. He glared back and more urgently this time. "Ow!" uttered Molly as she slowly deciphered his gesture. She placed the final piece of pancake in her mouth and Hugh quickly collected the plates and placed them in the sink. He took hold of Molly's hand and dragged her to the front door. "Just go off to do morning chores," Hugh called over his shoulder as he and Molly grabbed their boots and coats. Within a flash they were out the front door. Ali stared at the pancake in front of her. Her stomach tried to rumble a "yes please," but she held her breath and pushed the plate away. "I'll be in the office making calls if you need me," she said. She got to her feet and pulled her cardigan tightly around her body. She walked across to the office and quickly closed the door behind her. Molly and Hugh were on the front porch, pulling on their boots and coats as Tom's truck pulled up outside the house. He stepped out and called a cheery "morning" at them. He gave them a cheeky grin and tipped his hat as he bounded up to the front door. Molly and Hugh both broke into a sprint in the opposite direction towards the barn. Tom walked through the front door, took off his hat and scanned the room. "Morning, Tom," called Billy from the kitchen. Tom turned to see Billy and Ben sitting at the kitchen table. "Fresh coffee in the pot," Billy added casually. Tom glanced at Billy to try and figure out how much had been disclosed. He took Ben's relatively calm manner to mean that he must not know yet. Tom briskly walked past Ben, placed his hat on the table and poured himself a cup of coffee. "Is everything all right?" Ben asked, breaking the silence. Tom sheepishly joined them at the table and looked directly at Billy. Ben glanced quizzically across at both of them. "Well, at some point," he said, "someone is going to enlighten me at what you are both up to." "Tom's good at talking," answered Billy with a cheeky smile. "I think I'll let him explain," he added. "Ha, I don't think so, Billy," countered Tom. "It was your idea, so I think you should be the one to tell Ben." Billy readjusted himself in his seat, leant forwards on the table and looked at Ben. "I called Tom up last night and explained the situation. Told him what had happened," Billy began. "We were both in agreement that if you had someone to look after the ranch, then you would be going along with Ali." Ben remained silent as he absorbed Billy's words. Tom stepped in at this point and continued. "You know, I will always have your back, Ben," he reassured. "So I've come to help Billy, and we're going to run the ranch while you're away." Ben leant back in his chair and took in a deep breath. But Billy interjected before Ben could speak. "There is a plane ticket for you and one for Hugh waiting for you both at the airport. I called a favour with a friend," Billy continued. "Chad will be joining us in a few days too. I called him this morning," Tom finished. Ben took in another deep breath and tried to push down the tears of gratitude that were rapidly forming in his throat. He coughed in an attempt to clear them and looked down at the wood grain in the kitchen table. He couldn't think what to say. "Thank you," he finally muttered, as he headed off upstairs to pack. Tom and Billy remained at the kitchen table, a little stunned. "That wasn't quite how that was supposed to go," Tom said in amazement. "Wasn't he meant to kick off like he normally does and ramble on about how he couldn't possibly leave the ranch? But all we got was that thank you," he added. Billy looked at Tom with concern in his eyes. "He's not in good shape," he said gravely, "and the journey ahead is going to be a tough one." He interlocked his fingers in front of him, lost in thoughts. "What's going to happen with Ali, Hugh and Molly?" asked Tom. "Are they going to still live here? Is the engagement off? What is Ben going to do with the ranch?" Tom continued to reel off the questions, but all Billy could do was shrug his shoulders. Eventually they both fell silent. The silence was eventually broken by the sound of Hugh and Molly racing back from the barn to the front porch. "I won," chimed Molly, as she stood breathless at the door with her arms held up in celebration. They came bustling into the kitchen, taking off their boots and coats as they did so. "So?" questioned Hugh excitedly. "How did it go, Grandpa?" he asked as he bounced towards Billy. "Well, we have got the green light, kids. Best roll out phase 2, confirmed Billy. Hugh ran across to Molly, picked her up and swung her around. "Yay!" Hugh cried with a huge beaming smile. Okay, Molly shouted. She patted Hugh on the shoulders. "Put me down before I throw up," she added dramatically. Hugh quickly put Molly down and stepped back, keen to get out the firing line. Molly stopped a moment and they all watched as a smile began to spread across her face. "Come on, Hugh," she instructed. "Let's go and get our stuff before they come back down." Molly grabbed Hugh's hand and dragged him up the stairs. They both raced to the top of the stairs and ran to their rooms. Just moments later, they were pulling their suitcases back down. The cases bumped repetitively enthusiastically against each step. They were wheeling them across to the front door, but abruptly stopped as they heard the office door open. "What is that noise?" Ali asked angrily. Molly and Hugh froze behind their suitcases, unsure about what to say, but Ben suddenly appeared with his suitcase. He placed it down next to Molly to join the lineup. "What's happening?" asked Ali in confusion. "We're going to be late if you don't hit the highway soon," Ben said cheekily with a smirk. "We?" repeated Ali as the pieces of the puzzle started to fit together. But, Ali stuttered. At that moment, Tom got up from the kitchen table and placed his hat back on his head. "Morning, Miss Ali," he said as he walked past her and headed back outside. "Mum, come on, we'll explain on the way," Hugh exclaimed, jumping up and down on the spout. "Let's go," he added, as he took hold of his suitcase handle and dragged it out onto the front porch. He was followed closely by Molly and Ben. Ali's look turned to ice as she glared at Billy. Billy quickly scooted out of his seat. "I'll start up the truck," he said before disappearing outside. He nearly crashed into Ben as he scurried away. Ben reappeared and took hold of Ali's suitcase and handbag. "We're going to do this as a family," he explained lovingly. "Tom and Billy are going to look after the ranch, and I'm going to try and survive meeting my mother-in-law-to-be," he continued. Ali's face turned from thunder to fear at the thought. "I'll explain the rest on the way," Ben said, as he motioned for Ali to follow. Ali snapped out of her daze and took one last look around her new beautiful home and grabbed her coat. She stepped bravely outside and closed the door behind her. "I can do this," she said determinedly. She closed her eyes and dug deep within herself to find her strength. She finally took a deep breath and joined everyone in the truck. With a final slam of all the doors, they set off for the airport. Well, I will see you tomorrow for Chapter 2, Faith or Fear.